Hey guys, tonight we follow a piece of paper, not just any piece, mind you, but a tax receipt. Now don't yawn just yet. This humble scroll will outlive emperors, outlast empires, and be misfiled more times than you've had hot dinners. Right now in the candlelit quiet of a Byzantine back office, you watch a bleary-eyed scribe dip his pen, crack his knuckles, and begin to write something so routine, so mind-numbingly dull, that you probably won't survive this without a cup of tea and a generous helping of morbid curiosity. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit on a wooden bench that's just slightly too narrow, one leg tingling from the pressure. The room smells like wax, old wool, and dust, the unmistakable aroma of 9th century Constantinople's tax bureau. Outside, the city's golden domes shimmer under a fading sun, but in here time drips slowly like the candle wax pooling on the stone sill. You blink at the papyrus scroll on the desk, its edges curling like it's trying to escape its fate. The scribe opposite you doesn't look up. He's done this 1,000 times. In fact, he's writing on autopilot, his hand scrawls, while his mind wanders to dried figs, his cousin's wedding, and whether he remembered to feed the bureau's cat. The words flow: date, name, amount, purpose. You unfortunately are not the payer. You're the watcher. You're here to witness the dullest item in Byzantine documentation being born in sleepy ink. August 3rd, year of our Lord 843. Receipt of tax collection. 1 bushel oats, 3 bronze faules from the household of Basileus, son of Theocritos. It goes on. The ink is made from soot, wine sediment, and a splash of vinegar. Yes, really vinegar. A formula that has outlasted generations. The pen is a reed chewed at the tip, and the scribe's sleeve blackened from years of dragging through drying lines of numbers no one cared about. Outside, Constantinople hums. A bread seller calls out in the forum, boys argue over a dice game, and somewhere an official is loudly threatening to exile someone over an incorrect column total. But in this room, it's just you, the scribe, and a scroll that will not know peace for the next 1,000 years. You glance at the wax seal. That's the official part. The scribe lights a stub of beeswax, drips it onto the edge of the scroll, and presses the imperial seal into the warm blob with a grunt of boredom. The seal shows a double-headed eagle symbol of imperial authority and apparently tax enforcement. It's faintly misaligned. You wonder if anyone will notice. Spoiler, yes. In 700 years, a scholar will write an entire thesis on why that seal is 14 degrees off center. She'll be wrong, but enthusiastic. The receipt is now official, one of thousands issued that week, yet this one it will endure. Not because of its content. Goodness, no. The actual tax collected some grain, a few coins will be spent by Friday. But the receipt, like a cockroach of bureaucracy, will survive fire, flood, and Frenchmen. The scroll is placed in a wooden tube capped with an ivory stopper. That ivory probably imported from East Africa via Alexandria. Historians still argue whether these tubes were reused or ceremonially broken. No one agrees. You'd be surprised how many academic careers hinge on questions like that. The clerk stretches. His back cracks loud enough to scare a nearby cat. He mutters something about dinner and knocks over a pile of ink-stained scrolls that lands with a disheartening splat. Nobody reacts. Paperwork in Byzantium isn't glamorous, but it's relentless. Receipts, inventories, reports, all filed, sealed, stacked, and sometimes eaten by rats. Byzantine administration had its flaws, but it was weirdly obsessed with tracking grain. A single bag of barley might appear in 7 different records, each one requiring a different format. And this particular receipt, it's headed to Antioch. Why no real reason, just bureaucratic rooting? Some official there wants cross-verification. Maybe he's paranoid. Maybe he's trying to look busy. Or maybe he just likes scrolls. Historians aren't sure. Before it goes, though, it must dry. The ink is still tacky, so the clerk stands it upright in a drying rack. You watch the scribe take a sip of watered wine and begin writing another receipt with the same dead-eyed rhythm. He's forgotten yours already. A mouse scurries under the bench. You shift your foot. Somewhere behind you, a candle sputters out with a hiss. The air grows cooler. The scroll sits in its rack, drying, dreaming of a future it will never understand. It has no idea what's ahead, Earthquakes monks TikTok. For now, it's just a damp piece of bureaucracy in a city that thinks it will never fall. But you know better. You cradle the scroll carefully because naturally you're now the designated courier. It's early morning, and you're perched atop a lumpy donkey named Gregorios. Gregorios does not share your sense of historical gravitas. He swishes his tail in mild irritation as you jostle along a dusty road heading east toward Antioch. The tax receipt is tucked securely into a leather satchel strapped to the donkey's side, nestled between a wheel of old cheese and a packet of suspiciously damp documents. The road out of Constantinople winds past olive groves and goat pens under low morning mist. You pass a merchant caravan weighed down with amphorae and a group of teenage monks who refuse to make eye contact. Every pebble on the road seems to lodge itself in your lower spine. You begin to understand why so many ancient letters arrive smudge torn or just plain missing. The journey to Antioch, if you're lucky, takes several weeks. The empire is vast and the infrastructure, let's call it adventurous. You follow sections of the Via Egnatia and other military roads, still holding up after centuries, though much of your path is little more than goat track and aggressive pothole. Rain check. Robbers likely. Unexpected donkeys named Gregorios with deeply philosophical eyes. That's a you problem. Every evening you find a roadside inn, or at least somewhere with 4 walls and fewer than 5 scorpions. At one of these stops, a group of traders argues about wheat tariffs while a lute player massacres a love ballad in the corner. You try to sleep, the scroll wrapped in cloth and tucked under your makeshift pillow crinkles whenever you move. On day 6, you're stopped by an imperial checkpoint. A guard with the enthusiasm of a damp rag demands to inspect your cargo. He squints at the scroll's seal, snorts, and mutters, "Another one?" You nod. He waves you through. Apparently, tax paperwork isn't worth confiscating. By day 10, Gregorios develops a limp. You walk alongside him through arid hills and past an abandoned temple, now home to 3 smug goats and a sarcastic crow. You wonder how many other scrolls like yours have made this journey, how many were lost in rivers or used to start cooking fires. One legend claims an entire cart of tax documents was eaten by a swarm of desert locusts in Cilicia. Historians still argue whether that story is exaggerated or just depressingly plausible. You finally reach the outskirts of Antioch just as a dust storm begins to swirl. The city sprawls before you, grand busy, and more than a little overwhelmed. Earthquakes and invasions have left their mark, but the streets buzz with commerce and camel traffic. You hand over Gregorios to a boy who promises to feed him grapes he won't, and head to the regional tax office, also known as the most joyless building in the city. Inside it's humid and smells like boiling ink. A clerk in a sweat-stained robe takes your scroll, barely looking at you, and mutters, "Put it with the rest." You follow his gesture to a wall lined with pigeonholes, each one stuffed to the brim with scrolls, receipts, ledgers, organized in a way only the gods or this one clerk understand. You hesitate. Shouldn't it be signed? And you ask? He glances up. "Do I look like a signing kind of guy?" You gently place the scroll into a hole labeled CTG 843 MISC. No fanfare, no documentation. It now sits between a sheep census and something labeled goat incident. Clarification needed. And just like that, your part in the journey is over. Gregorios may limp home without you, but the receipt stays. A quiet little scroll, buried among thousands of others waiting to be filed, or lost, or rediscovered. Your job is done. You turn and leave, feet, aching, saddle sores blooming, and an overwhelming sense that no one will ever read that scroll again. But you'd be wrong, because in about 12 years, a fire is going to change everything. You return now years later as a fly on the wall, or perhaps just as the lingering smell of mildew inside the Antioch Tax Bureau. The room hasn't improved. Same low ceilings, same damp scrolls, same bored clerks nursing watery beer, and passive-aggressive parchment notes. The year is 855 and the receipt still sits in its pigeonhole, untouched, unsought, and utterly unimportant. Until a pigeon, not metaphorical this time, changes its fate. It begins innocently enough. A bird squeezes in through a cracked window above the filing shelves, flaps madly past a stack of wheat invoices, and in its flurry knocks a brass oil lamp clean off a ledge. The lamp lands with a clunk on a wooden desk already soaked in ink. A flicker, a pause, then whump. The fire isn't dramatic. It's not the kind that makes it into chronicles. But it's enough. A dozen scrolls catch parchment curling and blackening like autumn leaves. A minor clerk named Stamios panics, throws wine at the flames, and screams for help. The flames sputter and hiss. The room fills with smoke and shouted complaints. You dodge a flying ledger hurled toward a window. In the chaos, someone grabs the receipt, not because it's valuable, but because it's under their cup of lentil soup. That someone is Theodora, the cleaning woman. She yells at the clerks to move their lazy hides, smacks one with a broom, and stomps out of the room with the soggy scroll still stuck to her hand. Outside in the courtyard, she peels it off, wipes off a glob of soup, and eyes it skeptically. What's this then? Love poetry, she mutters. The phrase Ormire, oats paid in full, stares back at her. Not quite sonnet material. She almost tosses it. Almost. But then why waste paper? She smooths it out and takes it home, where she uses it to wrap a bar of soap. And in that humble capacity, the tax receipt survives another near-death experience. Over the next decade, the receipt is passed around like a piece of scrap. A child draws on the back stick figures, battling what appears to be a dragon, or possibly a cabbage. A merchant borrows it to wedge under a wobbly table leg. It lives in drawers between pages of cookbooks and once briefly under a floor tile to prevent drafts. Historians still argue whether the Antioch archives had any system at all. Some claim receipts were categorized by region and year. Others believe the filing strategy was more like hope and panic. One fringe theory suggests clerks simply offered bribes to the office pigeon in exchange for accurate deliveries. Still, the Byzantine administration was nothing if not persistent. Around 870, a newly appointed governor insists on a full audit of regional records. Suddenly, every office shed and broom closet is rifled through for anything that looks vaguely official. That's when the receipt faded, and food stained is discovered again, wedged inside a ledger titled Grain Disbursements, Possible Errors, and Unpleasant Surprises. The governor's aide, a fussy man named Nikitas with a passion for alphabetizing, insists it be refiled properly. With great ceremony, he slides the scroll into a sturdy wooden cabinet behind a creaky door labeled Items of Minor Fiscal Concern. There it will rest for another generation, sandwiched between a tax report on goose feathers and a sternly worded complaint about slippery bathhouse tiles. But even the most reinforced cabinets can't outlast Antioch's weather. In 893, a heavy rainstorm floods part of the archives. The floor sags. The receipt tumbles from its perch and slides behind the cabinet into a pocket of dry space beneath a crumbling stone wall. There, entombed in dust and forgotten schedules, it will rest for nearly 1,000 years. What survives isn't always what's important. Often it's what's ignored, overlooked, or inconvenient to throw out. While emperors rise and fall, while crusaders pass through and leave only footprints and graffiti, this little scroll slumbers in perfect bureaucratic exile. By now, the ink has faded into rust-colored whispers. The seal, still faintly visible, bears the double-headed eagle off-center, cracked. The corner with the child's drawing has curled like old bark, and yet it remains. Outside the wall, life moves on. Antioch becomes part of new empires. New tongues echo in the streets, but no one thinks to look behind the filing cabinet that doesn't exist anymore. The receipt waits curled like a sleeping spider in the dark. And then one day in the 19th century, a Frenchman arrives with a mustache, a chisel, and too much enthusiasm. The Frenchman's name is Lucien Perrault, and he has absolutely no idea what he's about to find. You're in 1881 now. Antioch is under Ottoman rule, and the ruins of its ancient quarters are just starting to attract the wrong kind of attention, namely European gentlemen in funny hats looking for antiquities. Lucien, an amateur archaeologist with professional ego, believes he's here to uncover a Roman bathhouse. Instead, he uncovers a rat's nest, several angry lizards, and what appears to be a partial wall of a Byzantine office. The sun beats down. The dig site smells like dust, sweat, and hubris. Lucien paces dramatically, clutching a notebook filled with mostly guesses. You're sitting on a pile of discarded bricks, watching him yell at a poor local boy named Kamal to be gentle with the trowel. Kamal rolls his eyes and proceeds to jab at the wall with the energy of a child forced to dig up history for someone else's museum. Then it happens. The wall gives way slightly. Lucien leans in. There in a crevice barely the width of a loaf of bread, he sees something. Rolled brittle, wrapped in centuries of dust, like a moth in a forgotten cupboard, your scroll. Lucien lets out a triumphant squawk. Un document byzantin, he cries, although no one around speaks French. He snatches it up gently for once and examines the cracked seal, the faded ink, the ghost of an ancient tax record. It is, of course, profoundly boring. But Lucian doesn't care. He's convinced he's holding something monumental. He squints at the faint handwriting misreads Basileos as Basileos and immediately declares the scroll a record of an emperor's private taxes. He may not be fluent in Byzantine Greek, but he is fluent in self-promotion. Within a week, he's packed it along with pottery shards, some coins, and a suspiciously modern-looking spoon into a crate marked, "To Paris, urgent." The receipt sails the Mediterranean on a rusty steamer filled with diplomats, sheep, and one very seasick cat. It survives a brief port delay in Marseille and a customs official who almost uses it to swat a mosquito. Finally, it arrives at the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, where it is greeted with polite disinterest. The museum curator, a chain-smoking man named Fournier, takes one look and says, "We'll put it with the minor materials." The scroll is assigned the deeply uninspiring label, Miscon Scroll Tax, late Byzantine fragmented, possibly duplicate. And just like that, the receipt enters the silent world of archival purgatory. Placed in a drawer, numbered, logged, forgotten again. Years pass. Dust thickens. Wars come and go. The scroll sits quietly in a drawer next to a Babylonian clay token and an envelope full of mysterious hair samples. It survives the chaos of World War I, protected by the sheer invisibility of being unimportant. When curators flee the museum during World War II, no one thinks to take it. Yet somehow, amid bombings and ration lines, the drawer remains intact. Historians still argue whether Lucien Perrault ever understood what he found. One suggests he deliberately inflated its significance to secure more funding. Another claims he genuinely believed it referenced imperial taxes. A third scholar proposes that Lucien couldn't read Greek at all and was winging it the entire time. Frankly, you suspect all three are right. Decades later, in 1967, a graduate student named Mireille discovers the receipt while researching medieval bookkeeping methods. She squints, tilts her head, and mutters, "Why is this here?" Mireille doesn't throw it away, of course. Academics never throw anything away. Instead, she references it in a footnote in her dissertation, which is read by exactly 4 people, 2 of whom are her parents. But it's enough. The scroll gets relabeled, reboxed, and shuffled to a new corner of the archives labeled Byzantine, economic low priority. Quote. That label's still there today, and so the receipt waits again. Ink nearly vanished, seal barely legible, paper as thin as old onion skin, but still here, still intact, waiting for one last twist. Because in 2019, a teenager from Vermont, yes, Vermont is about to make it famous again. You're still the scroll, still fragile, still smelling faintly of damp linen and time. The years have stacked like sediment around you, wars, renovations, bored interns. But now someone is coming. Someone whose Google search history includes phrases like cool old receipts, Byzantine memes, and how to get famous fast with obscure facts. Her name is Casey. She's 16. She's wearing a hoodie that says, "I paused my game for this," and a backpack full of trail mix and overconfidence. She's in Paris because her mother won a grant for sustainable urban farming, and Casey, bored out of her mind, was dragged along under protest. They visit all the tourist spots, of course, the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, the Sewer Museum. But it's during a rainy Wednesday visit to the Musée de l'Homme, which, let's be honest, no teenager has ever willingly chosen, that Casey stumbles into your life, or more accurately, into the climate-controlled, dimly lit corner where forgotten scrolls go to die. It happens like this. She's bored wandering behind her mother, who is deeply engaged in conversation about indigenous agriculture. Casey spots a side exhibit titled, "Everyday Empire's Paperwork in the Ancient Bureaucrat." She groans but steps in. There's papyrus. There is a Sumerian ledger. There is a wall quote about the glory of taxation. And then she sees you. You're behind glass now. Not prominently displayed, but visible, mounted, slightly crooked in a frame, your once cracked seal preserved under glare-resistant plastic. The new label reads, Byzantine receipt fragment, circa 10th century CE, probable tax record, Northern Syria, originally misclassified, rediscovered 1967. Most visitors glance once and move on, but Casey, for reasons even she can't explain, lingers. She stares. The faded ink, the looping letters, the absurdity of it. "Dude," she mutters, "this is literally a receipt. Then she does what any teenager with internet access and a sense of irony would do. She pulls out her phone, snaps a picture, and adds a caption. This 1,000-year-old tax receipt has seen more war drama and climate change than I have. Rasha relatable Mashi Yar Byzantine bureaucracy, Shashi scrollcore. She uploads it to Instagram, then TikTok, then X formerly Twitter, then Reddit. It spreads fast. Within days, your image is everywhere. People make memes. One shows you captioned, "When you just wanted a bath and now your taxes are in a museum." Another overlays dramatic music and calls you the most boring scroll in history that outlived Hitler. Historians get involved. Byzantinists rise from their academic slumber like startled cats. Dr. Helena Metsopoulos of the University of Thessaloniki posts a 30-minute video breaking down the receipt's real context. This document is critical for understanding provincial tax flow under the Macedonian dynasty. Note the references to grain levy and the household mark C here under the faded lambda. People go wild. Some debate whether you're real. Some accuse Casey of faking the photo. Conspiracy forums briefly suggest you're a secret Vatican code. Meanwhile, a medieval-themed band called Seal and Trowel releases a concept EP inspired by your imagined journey. And then finally, real scholars start paying attention again. One Dr. Yanis Dimitriou petitions for high-resolution imaging. Another, an Ottoman-era archivist, cross-references your handwriting with early 10th century Antiochian tax clerks. A third, Mireille's former student, now a professor, finds her 1967 dissertation and reintroduces her footnote as a central citation in a new paper titled Dust and Authority, The Life of a Byzantine Receipt. You are cataloged again, this time with care, retranslated, rescanned, digitally preserved. You're even uploaded as a 3D model in a virtual exhibit called Bureaucracy Through the Ages. Casey, she gets invited to speak at a virtual conference titled Teenagers and the Unexpected Resurgence of Byzantine Studies. She opens with, "I just thought it was kind of funny." The scroll, you becomes an object of fascination. Academic papers, lectures, merch. Someone prints your image on a reusable tote bag that says, "I paid my dues C 950 CE. And so more than 1,000 years after someone dipped a stylus into ink and recorded a tax payment under a hot Syrian sky, you finally made it. You're still dry, still faded, still folded awkwardly at the edge. But now at long last you are seen. You are known, and you're not done yet. Because someone else, someone with an eye for deeper secrets, is about to ask the most dangerous question in all of archival history. It begins as many museum scandals do, with a fake janitor and a distracted night guard. You're gliding silently through the quiet halls of the Musée de l'Homme at 3:14 a.m. The building hums faintly, air vents, old radiators, one lonely espresso machine clunking to life. Somewhere near the lobby, a security guard named Philippe is watching reruns of Columbo on a tiny phone screen tucked discreetly into his coat. You float past him. He doesn't notice. The thief arrives dressed in beige overalls, pushing a mop bucket ID badge swinging. Totally ordinary, except the badge is fake, the mop is empty, and the bucket is really a collapsible storage case with foam interior. The target, not the jeweled sword, not the Roman bust, just one absurdly fragile, utterly unimpressive-looking scroll resting behind bulletproof glass in the corner of the Byzantine Minor Documents exhibit. Yes, that receipt. It's been trending again after a viral docuseries. Grain and Glory: Untold Tales of Byzantine Tax got picked up by a streaming platform, and that's put a price on its head. Some anonymous collector, one of those underground types with private libraries and a suspicious fondness for velvet gloves, has offered serious money for it. So here's this burglar crouching beneath a security camera blind spot, unscrewing a panel with rubberized tools. The glass case hisses open. You brace yourself for the crackle of ancient parchment meeting Parisian night air. It doesn't come. The scroll isn't there. Just an empty mount and a very small note. Too slow, try again. The consortium, that's when you realize someone else already stole the receipt. Historians still argue whether the consortium even exists. Some say it's a collective of rogue archivists. Others claim it's just two obsessive collectors and a dog. A few insist it's actually a cover name for an eccentric retired librarian in Thessaloniki who funds missions to rescue neglected Byzantine artifacts. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: they beat the thief to it. A minor scandal explodes. The museum goes on lockdown. Tabloids scream Byzantine receipt swapped in daring heist. One outlet includes a mock-up of the thief riding off on a donkey scroll clenched between their teeth. In reality, the scroll is already in a safe house somewhere in southern Greece, lying atop a velvet cloth, next to a warm lamp, 3 sleepy cats, and half a bottle of Retsina. The woman now in possession of the receipt, Eleni Papadopoulos, retired archivist, widowed, fiercely protective of forgotten things. She reads the scroll every evening like a bedtime story, whispering its barely legible contents in the glow of a flickering lantern. She doesn't plan to sell it, or even donate it to a major institution. No, Eleni believes some things are best left out of glass boxes and hashtags. She makes her own copy, a careful reproduction. Artificial aging, simulated ink, even a forged smear of medieval lentil soup. It's that replica the museum gets back slipped anonymously into a mailbox 6 months later. And they never notice. Or maybe they do. Maybe one curator finds the parchment a little too perfect, the ink just believable. But museums have budgets and stress and priorities. And so the scroll returns quietly to its display, a placeholder, now a symbol of something that may or may not be there. You drift now through Eleni's home. You see the real receipt wrapped in soft linen, nestled in a carved cedar box from Cappadocia. Above it hangs a small handwritten sign. Paid in full, kept anyway. One of Eleni's cats sneezes. Another curls around the box like a fuzzy mote. You hear the faint clink of her teacup as she settles in, humming an old folk tune no one sung in public for 70 years. And just like that, the scroll begins a new phase of its absurdly long, impossibly unimportant, deeply human journey. But it won't be the last. Because next week, an academic from Kyoto, who once saw the scroll in a meme, will knock on Eleni's door with a research grant, a suitcase full of analysis equipment, and a plate of homemade mochi as a peace offering. The scroll is about to go global again. The Kyoto academic's name is Dr. Minako Ishida, and she has traveled nearly 9,000 kilometers for what most people would still call a tax receipt. You're perched on her shoulder as she steps off the train in Thessaloniki, lugging a backpack stuffed with microspectrometry tools, a collapsible light table, and a USB drive full of 12th century Byzantine calligraphy comparisons. She's exhausted, undercaffeinated, and very slightly nervous because she's pretty sure she's about to meet the woman who outwitted an international museum. Eleni opens the door with a soft smile and a cat on her hip. There's no pretense, no denial. She invites Dr. Ishida inside, pours her tea, and gestures toward the cedar box sitting innocently on the table. You came for the scroll, she asks, as if offering a slice of cake. You hover between them as Dr. Ishida unwraps the linen. The parchment crinkles slightly like old paper, remembering how to breathe. Minako gasps, not out of shock, but reverence. The ink, the folds, the ink-stained fingerprint in the margin. It's all here. This is it, she whispers, the real one. And Eleni just nods. He waited 200 years. Another afternoon won't kill him. You blink. Wait, did she just call the scroll him? Yes, she did. What follows is 5 days of careful, gentle analysis. Dr. Ishida scans every square millimeter, photographing the fibers, comparing the seal's wax compound to those used in known minting sites of the Anatolikon theme. She notices something others hadn't, an embedded thread dyed purple, just one strand woven into the edge. Possibly decorative, possibly symbolic. Historians still argue whether this purple thread meant the receipt came from an estate with imperial connections, or if it was just an accident from a reused scribe's robe. One bold researcher even suggests it was a way to tag tax documents going to Constantinople, color-coded bureaucracy, as she calls it. Meanwhile, Eleni watches calmly, her cat's unimpressed. She doesn't take notes. She just listens. Sometimes she hums. Sometimes she interrupts with unexpected clarity. That mark there, it's a merchant's tally. They added it later, likely when they were skimming off the grain. Wait, how does she know that? Dr. Ishida is too polite to ask. But you suspect Eleni has spent a lot more time with forgotten records than most university departments. After all, who better to guard the boring than someone who's never been bored? Eventually, the scans are done. The parchment is rewrapped. The cats resume their nap formations. Minako prepares to leave. But before she goes, she offers something. Not money, not glory, not a photo op, a partnership. She proposes digitizing the scroll carefully, securely, anonymously, so that the world can study it without knowing its exact location. Eleni listens, pours another cup of tea, and finally says, only if you promise not to call it just a receipt. Deal. The digitized scroll goes online through an obscure academic archive in Kyoto under the file name Eredipo sur Receipt. Structural integrity just vion tetag. Within weeks, obscure medievalist blogs and Discord servers light up. Footnotes appear, forums buzz. Someone finds a second document from the same village in a monastery basement in Georgia, the country, not the state. A theory forms. This wasn't just a receipt. It was the final form in a 4-part record sequence requisition assessment, dispatch, and payment. Historians go wild. One even tries to recreate the entire grain collection route on foot, walking from the ruins of Aradipos to the ghost port of Seleucia, eating only Byzantine-era foods along the way. He makes it 14 days before giving up in an olive grove, muttering about taxes and fermented turnip water. The receipt, your receipt, is now a superstar of late-stage Byzantine logistics. And still, it's only partially translated. The handwriting in the corner, scholars can't agree whether it says 1 amphora barley or 3 goats owed for roof repair. And that mystery, along with the purple thread, the doodle of what might be a chicken, and the very faint smudge that might be a fingerprint, keeps people reading, keeps them dreaming, keeps the story going. Because now, thanks to a Japanese academic, a Greek librarian, and a teenager with Wi-Fi, the scroll has gone from tax trivia to global legend. But even legends have to move on, especially when a shipping crate marked Miskatonic University Special Collections shows up in Thessaloniki with a strange request. The crate arrives with no return address, just a customs form, a barcode, and a polite printed card slipped beneath the lid. To Miss Eleni Papadopoulos, respectfully requesting temporary access to the Aradipos receipt for comparative archival research. Department of Obscure Manuscripts, Miskatonic University. Now you may pause and squint. Miskatonic. Isn't that the fictional university from Lovecraft's stories? Yes, it is. But here's the thing. Turns out there is a Miskatonic University. Or rather, a real-world academic group in Massachusetts that legally registered the name as part of a private historical library project. They're eccentric, cloaked in a bit of ironic mystery, and most importantly, unusually well-funded. Think tweed jackets, antique pens, and grant money from places with names like the Sedgwick Trust for Marginal Textualities. You're already swirling with suspicion as Eleni opens the accompanying letter. It's handwritten in green ink, almost comically courteous, requesting only a temporary loan for cross-reference with our 9th century Arabic tax fragments. The letter closes with, P.S. We have reason to believe your receipt may complete a fragmented scribe cycle from Mosul. If so, the implications are, well, considerable. Eleni reads it twice, then once more aloud to her cat. The cat is non-committal. You glide beside her as she makes her decision. And so within a week, the real receipt, not the replica, sets off again. This time packaged in archival foam, tucked inside layers of tamper-proof envelopes, riding in a hand-couriered diplomatic pouch on a flight bound for Boston. A sleepy customs agent blinks at the paperwork, shrugs and waves it through. At Miskatonic, the receipt is received with gentle, almost ceremonial care. Dr. Ezra Bloom, head of the manuscripts department, dons gloves the same shade as antique margarine and opens the box as if lifting the veil from a sacred text. His assistant Petra gasps. It's even uglier in person. They begin the comparative analysis immediately. And here's where things take a strange turn. First, there's the ink. Some elements match a known pigment compound used in Mosul in the 840s, an improbable link given the scroll's supposed origin in Antioch. Then there's the marginalia, a nearly invisible smudge next to the grain tally. Under infrared, it's revealed to be a tiny stamped symbol, a stylized bird, not part of any known Byzantine seal. Historians still argue whether this bird is the mark of an underground scribal society, a local merchant guild, or, most confusingly, a personal emblem used by a regional governor known for smuggling religious texts into hostile territories. But the wildest discovery, a fragment of verse. It's faint, barely decipherable, jammed between the columns like a scribal afterthought. Written in early Arabic script and once translated reads, "Wasfid in the dust of barley paid shall veil the feet of kings." No one can explain it. Why embed poetry in a tax record? Why use a symbol never registered in Constantinople's archives? Why this bizarre fusion of language, bureaucratic monotony, and covert artistry. Theories blossom like mold in a damp scriptorium. One suggests the scribe was part of a resistance group embedding messages in tax records, using the very mechanism of empire to preserve dissident thoughts. Another believes it was a hidden prayer meant to protect the village from imperial wrath. Yet another quite vocal scholar insists it's part of a larger pattern of marginal verse showing up in dry documents across the Near East, what she calls the whisper line. You float beside them as they argue, analyze, and order too much takeout. You pass over centuries of dust fingerprints and bureaucratic whispers. Every speck of this scroll is now scrutinized like a Rosetta Stone on a budget. And you watch as once again the world changes around it. By now, online forums refer to the receipt not by its accession number, but by its new nickname, the Whisper Scroll. A podcast miniseries debuts within weeks. T-shirts are printed. A band names itself after the mysterious barley line. There's even a moment one ridiculous Tuesday when someone proposes a Netflix series starring a fictionalized theocratos tax clerk by day, undercover poet by night. Eleni receives bi-weekly updates, handwritten of course. She never responds. She just circles interesting bits in red and adds them to her wall of clippings right above a post-it that reads, "It was always important." The scroll stays in Miskatonic's care for 9 months, then quietly returns to Eleni. No fanfare, no press release, just a hand-delivered box and a quietly whispered, "Thank you." And just when you think this tired piece of parchment might finally get to rest, a knock at the door. This time it's a delegation from the Greek Ministry of Culture. And they want to talk. The knock is polite but persistent. You hover just above the doorknob as Eleni opens it, clutching a warm cup of mountain tea and wearing her "I'm too old for your committees" cardigan. On her doorstep, 2 suited officials from the Greek Ministry of Culture, flanked by a third figure in a slightly too shiny blazer and sunglasses that haven't been fashionable since the early 2000s. Ms. Papadopoulos, the taller one, begins. "We believe you're in possession of a certain Byzantine document of great cultural significance." Eleni smiles politely, doesn't flinch. Behind her, one of her cats yawns from atop the cedar box. You can practically hear the kettle sigh in the background. What follows is a delicate dance. The ministry wants the scroll back not for punishment, not even necessarily for control, but for national stewardship. A new exhibit is opening in Athens. Everyday Byzantium, the empire of small things. The receipt would be the headliner. They offer preservation, security, full credit, even a dedicated temperature-controlled room. There's talk of insurance, cataloging, QR codes, maybe an audio tour voiced by that guy from the baking competition show. You float beside Eleni as she listens, sips her tea, and taps one foot softly. She doesn't say no, but she doesn't say yes. Instead, she invites them in. Inside the house, the officials marvel at her notes, her diagrams, translations, side-by-side comparisons. One flips through a binder labeled Alternate Readings of Marginalia Eridipos to Aleppo. Another comments on the quality of her handwriting. The third blazer sunglasses takes a call in the kitchen and loudly says the words, "Netflix interest and early rights." Eleni gives him a look that could curdle milk. Eventually, the ministry offers a compromise, a traveling exhibit. The receipt would be on display for 1 year across select institutions, Athens, Thessaloniki, maybe Istanbul, if things stay politically stable. After that, full return to Eleni's possession, no questions asked. They'd even fund a documentary. It's tempting. She says she'll think about it. But that night, as the cats resettle and the city's lights blink in the distance, she wraps the scroll, once again places it back in its box, and pens a letter. The letter is addressed to Dr. Ishida. Inside it reads, "Minako, I think it's time he traveled again, but let's choose the path ourselves. By morning, a new plan is in motion. Instead of joining a flashy government exhibit, the receipt goes on an independent academic road tour. University libraries, hidden archives, small-town museums with leaky roofs and passionate interns. No velvet ropes, no merchandise, just a glass case, a few display notes, and a quietly blinking LED humidity monitor. And at every stop, something curious happens. People come. Not thousands, not tour buses, but enough. Students, local historians, elderly couples, people who don't usually go to exhibits unless they involve dinosaurs or impressionists, and they stand there reading a tiny crumpled record of barley payment from a village most maps don't even name. Some cry. One woman whispers, "My grandfather used to keep receipts like this in a biscuit tin." One child asks if the man who wrote it is still alive. Another visitor, a postal worker from Kamotini, stares at it for almost an hour before saying, "It's beautiful because it's so pointless." You ride along with it, of course. From town to town, from dusty faculty offices to sunlit library nooks. You watch as the scroll is unboxed, cleaned, explained, adored, and carefully packed away again. You hear the whispers of people discovering that the past was made not just by emperors and generals, but by clerks, and grain, and ink smudges. Historians still argue whether this road tour was irresponsible. Some say the parchment's fibers weakened from movement. Others claim it gained a second life it never could have had behind UV-proof glass. But no one argues with what it stirred. And meanwhile, something even stranger begins to emerge. Remember that purple thread? Turns out a scholar from the Balkans finally finds a second document with the same type of thread, this one a land dispute record between two monasteries. Then a third from a port customs list in Ravenna. All tiny, mundane, bureaucratic texts, all with the same thread. It becomes known as the Violet Line. A theory forms these documents weren't randomly threaded. They were part of a secret communication network among scribes, perhaps designed to bypass censorship or even link hidden records across the crumbling empire. And your receipt, the first confirmed node in the network. Soon people are mapping connections, trying to trace messages. Historians get giddy, grad students weep. You drift over a corkboard somewhere in Prague, covered in strings and pins and poorly translated receipts. And back in Eleni's home, she watches the news quietly, the cats curled in their usual formation, and chuckles. I told you he had more to say. So now the scroll, your scroll, our scroll, is not just a document. It's part of a whispered web. You travel next to the University of Tübingen in Germany, where a linguistics professor has become mildly obsessed. His name is Dr. Felix Greif, and he's convinced the grain receipt contains a second layer of meaning hidden in the shape of the handwriting itself. He calls it semantic slope theory. His argument that Byzantine scribes under certain conditions allowed emotion to seep into the very tilt and curve of their letters, that their mental state, anxiety, fatigue, maybe even boredom left a visual residue. And he thinks Theocritos, our reluctant tax scribe, was having a particularly bad day. Greif's analysis is passionate, slightly bonkers, but charming. According to his data, the last line of the receipt slouches harder than any document from the same period. It droops downward a steep slope into melancholy. You see, he tells his class, gesturing with a laser pointer. This is the handwriting of a man who had not had lunch. Students chuckle. One takes it seriously and launches a TikTok series called Scribe Mood, Analyzing Ancient Documents Based on Emotional Gravity. It gets surprisingly popular. Turns out people enjoy projecting inner turmoil onto parchment. Meanwhile, a visiting scholar from Cairo notices something else, something barely visible. The scroll's backside contains faint impressions, almost like a second layer of text. Not ink, not written, but pressed. As if another document had been placed over it during storage so long ago that its own handwriting ghosted into the fibers of the scroll beneath. They bring in a forensic imaging team. The ghost text reveals the start of a transaction record, this one mentioning a priest, a horse, and 3 jugs of ceremonial wine. It's unclear if the 2 documents were stored together or if this new ghost was entirely unrelated, just an echo from another tax life. Still, it adds yet another layer to your already complicated artifact. Historians still argue whether the scroll absorbed this trace during its time in a bishop's archive, or whether it originated from the scribe's own desk, maybe even accidentally stacked during a busy day in the grain office. But the effect is undeniable. The receipt isn't just a scroll anymore. It's a palimpsest of lives, of logistics, mistakes, ghost wine, and unspoken emotion. Every new lab, every curious scholar adds another microscopic detail to its resume. And then comes the documentary. Not the Netflix one. That fizzled. This one's different. Funded quietly by an academic film collective in Lyon, it's called Not Folded Empires. Shot in soft grays and golds with ambient sound and long silences, it follows the receipt's journey from Eridipos to Antioch, from Eleni's cedar box to lecture halls across the world. You get B-roll of Dr. Ishida in a Kyoto garden sipping tea and murmuring, "I still don't understand why he wrote the barley weight twice." You get footage of the ministry official in Athens walking through a warehouse of damaged pottery, whispering, "We always knew the boring things held truth." You get Eleni sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by cats saying, "We keep waiting for the big stories to explain history, but it's always this, barley and ink." The documentary wins a small award, then another. Eventually it becomes part of a high school curriculum in Belgium. And now students across Europe are writing essays about the scroll. Fan fiction appears online, some of it oddly romantic, featuring Theocritos as a tragic ink-stained hero trying to escape bureaucratic tyranny through coded poetry. You wince slightly, but also, it kind of tracks. And then the scroll is invited to the Vatican. Yes, that Vatican. Not to the main library, of course, but to a side collection deep within an archive so old the books there smell like basil and dust. A Jesuit scholar named Father Matteo believes he's found a parallel scroll in one of their lock cases, another grain receipt, this one from a Syrian village dated within 10 years of yours. They compare them side by side. Same seal format, same ink recipe, same margin doodle of a strange-looking bird. Not a chicken after all. It's a dove. Or maybe a quail. Historians still argue whether it's a local symbol, a scribe's personal motif, or part of a secret code used by dissenting Christian sects. One particularly excited scholar believes it connects to a banned gospel movement that once buried its teachings in ordinary ledgers. Regardless, the Vatican sends you back with a warm thank you note and 2 politely worded pages of theological disclaimers. Back in Greece, Eleni hangs the note on her fridge. Next to it, a clipping from a children's magazine, which recently ran a short comic called "The Little Receipt That Could." In it, the scroll has googly eyes and a tiny smile and helps lost villagers find their way home using only barley math and kindness. You sigh. But also, yeah, that's fair. Because at this point, the scroll has passed beyond scholarship, beyond preservation. It's become legend. Not in a grand golden sense, but in the quiet way legends sometimes grow. Paper and ink, one man's lunch tally, a faded bird in the corner. And you, what are you? You're still with it, watching, listening, waiting for its next stop. Because it's not done yet. You're in Toronto now. A late autumn snow taps gently against the museum windows as a curator in fingerless gloves adjusts the lighting on your glass case. It's a temporary Byzantine exhibit, modest but lovingly assembled. A bronze oil lamp here, a child's ring there, and in the center flanked by nothing but space and reverence, the scroll. Your scroll. Visitors drift in coats, still steaming cheeks red from wind. They pause. They stare. Many don't know what they're looking at. A few squint at the label. Tax receipt, Aradipos, region Suriuri 1072. Ink on parchment. Provenance disputed. Contains barley data. But for some, just a few, something happens. You see it in the way they lean closer, how they trace the curves of the faded letters with their eyes. One woman mouths the name Theocritos like it's a password. Another whispers, "I write invoices for a living," and then doesn't move for 6 minutes. You're no longer just a document. You're a mirror. And that mirror is getting bigger. Scholars keep uncovering odd overlaps, receipts with similar wording, similar thread, similar ink density. One claims to find a reference to Theocritos himself in a later document, an inventory list noting a missing clerk due to personal madness. Another finds a brief marginal note in a religious codex. T wrote again. It's worse. Whether it's the same man or not, historians still argue. But the real surprise comes from an intern named Matteo, currently finishing a master's in Byzantine logistics. He notices something everyone else missed: the weight markings on your scroll, barely legible at the edge, don't quite add up. There's a discrepancy, tiny but deliberate. In modern terms, someone skimmed barley. Just a bit. Not enough to sound alarms, but enough to make you tilt your ethereal head and go, Matteo cross-references with nearby village records, or rather later transcriptions of what might be nearby village records, and discovers a short-lived grain shortfall in the region 3 months after your receipt was logged. It lines up. Someone, maybe Theocritos, maybe the farmer, maybe a nameless supervisor, fudged the numbers. And now the scroll becomes something else entirely: a document of fraud. Petty fraud, sure, but fraud nonetheless. Eleni, when informed, just sips her tea and mutters, "I knew that weight felt smug." The discovery makes headlines in academic circles. Byzantine bookkeeping betrayal becomes the subject of a heated panel at the International Medievalist Conference. You get a spotlight mention in a journal article titled Dishonest Ink Deceit in Daily Life in the Middle Byzantine Period. There's even a meme, a stylized Theokratos holding a grain sack with the caption, "Me miscount never." Suddenly, the scroll is less a passive artifact and more a piece of drama. You imagine a scribe with ink-stained fingers and tired eyes glancing over his shoulder as he smooths the parchment. Maybe he knew the shipment had come up short. Maybe he was trying to help the farmer. Maybe he was just done with everything and wanted to go home early. You float above the memory of that moment. Hear the scratching of the stylus, the quiet intake of breath, the soft sigh as he lets the ink settle. You'll never know the full story, but that ambiguity, that is the soul of history. Fast forward. Eleni visits Toronto. She arrives wrapped in an enormous purple scarf and carrying a package. She attends a panel, signs a few autographs reluctantly, and then asks to be left alone with the scroll after hours. The museum agrees. Inside the dim hall, she unwraps the package, a reproduction scroll case, hand-carved cedar modeled on 11th century prototypes. Inside it, a letter sealed wax-stamped, addressed to the next one. She slips it behind your display mount, quietly, tenderly. Then she leans forward and says, "You're going to outlive me. Don't get cocky." She's smiling, but there's something final in her tone. And so your story moves again. A few months later, a school group visits. One student, tall, nervous, with a sketchbook under his arm, stares too long. Then he starts drawing. First you, then the grain. Then Theokratos imagined in dreamy ink strokes surrounded by whispering barley. His teacher leans over and says, "You've drawn this 3 times now." The student shrugs. I think he was lonely. You can't exactly nod, but you're still here, and you're still watching. You've been folded, hidden, misread, buried, stolen, mailed, loved, disputed, filmed, memed, and now honored, which is wild considering you were just trying to log some barley. Now you're headed home. Not your home. Not the Aradipo's grain office. That's probably somewhere beneath a modern city block, now covered by asphalt and traffic, and a kebab shop with great lunchtime crowds. But close. You return to Cyprus. After years abroad, the Department of Antiquities requests you back, part of a rotating cultural property program aimed at reconnection, and if we're being honest, bureaucratic brownie points. You're flown in a nitrogen-stabilized case packed tighter than a Fabergé egg in witness protection. Customs takes their sweet time. One official makes a joke about ancient bribes and is promptly glared into silence by a Canadian archivist with resting serious face. Eventually, you arrive at a small climate-controlled wing in Nicosia. Newly renovated, white walls, soft lighting, a surprisingly lovely smell of olive soap and polished stone. You're placed in a wide, shallow case alongside other fragments of forgotten commerce, shipping manifests, warehouse tallies, and a tax exemption letter for a mule named Hero. And people come, more than expected. Cypriots mostly, but also tourists, school kids, a sleepy-eyed French couple on honeymoon who spend 15 whole minutes reading the translated plaque, a farmer from Limassol who mutters grain doesn't lie and taps the glass like he knows something. One night during a power flicker, a night guard claims he heard whispering. No one believes him. Except you, of course. Because you were whispering, just a little. It's strange to be here again. Not where you started exactly, but close. And in returning, you seem to trigger a ripple. People begin looking for more. Amateur archaeologists scour hillsides. Retired professors dust off half-catalog scrolls. A teenager in Paphos goes viral after allegedly locating an old olive press with inscriptions matching your seal mark. It's not verified, but still. Historians still argue whether the resurgence is fueled by academic excitement, national pride, or simply boredom after a particularly grim winter flu season. But no one argues the scroll has become a symbol of what exactly depends on who you ask. To the ministry resilience, to school teachers accessibility, to one YouTube essayist named Chronobean, you're proof that administrative ephemera can outlive empires. She has a point. She also has a cool intro jingle. But there's a new theory now, a controversial one, put forth by a retired physicist turned paleographer named Dr. Jalal Ibn Musa, currently living in Larnaca with 6 cats and a mild caffeine addiction. He believes the ink in your scroll, specifically the iron gall formulation, was contaminated by trace volcanic ash from an eruption near Sicily in 1069. According to him, that ash altered the ink's long-term stability, making your lines more resistant to fading than similar documents. A preservation fluke, a chemistry accident. Basically, you survived because someone 600 kilometers away had a very bad day with magma. The theory causes a stir. Counter-arguments pour in. Some say the scroll's condition is due to good storage and minimal exposure. Others argue the ash is unrelated, and Dr. Jalal's lab is also where one of his cats recently spilled espresso. The truth, well, you've always had a thing for ambiguity. Meanwhile, in a cozy house by the sea, Eleni watches from afar. She's mostly retired now, though she sometimes gives guest lectures, usually titled, Objects That Shouldn't Matter But Do. Her favorite anecdote involves a student who once wrote an entire senior thesis arguing the scroll was an elaborate forgery by a rogue librarian named Panayotis, who lived during the Ottoman era. She called it brilliantly wrong. Eleni keeps a replica of you on her bookshelf. Not one of those glossy museum gift shop numbers either. Hand-painted, real parchment, slightly burned on one corner for drama. She says hello to it every morning. Back at the museum, a new guard starts her first shift. She walks past your case, slows, then stops. She leans down, eyes narrow. She reads the label. Then again. Then slowly her gaze lifts to you, really lifts. Lingers. You can feel it. Another one. Another watcher. Another gentle heartbeat entering your orbit. That's how it's been. That's how it always will be. Not fireworks, not gold. Just one person, then another, then another. Each one carrying you a little further. You used to be the last step in a supply chain. Now you're the beginning of a conversation. You were once a dull tally of agricultural weight. Now you're the thing that sparks a sigh, a joke, a wondering glance, a late-night question typed into a search bar. You're a historical accident, a bureaucratic fossil, a survivor. Not because you were important, but because someone decided you might be. And maybe that's the real magic. Not the ink, not the ash, not the seal, but the people who kept you, the people who read you, and the ones like her, like you, who are still listening. Years pass. Dust gathers on newer cases. Exhibits rotate. The Cypriot Museum slowly reshapes itself into something sleeker, more interactive, with too many touchscreens and a looping, slightly too loud soundtrack of lutes and ambient goat bells. But you remain in your humble glass case, unmoving, unpretentious, unyielding. Curators debate replacing your spotlight with a soft overhead diffuser, something gentler on parchment integrity, but ultimately decide not to. It's part of the atmosphere, someone says. People like how it glows. And you do glow faintly, like a memory of candlelight still echoing off stone walls. The museum adds a new label, a moment in a 1,000-year conversation. A little dramatic, but you allow it. And then one spring morning, a schoolboy asks a question that will somehow reshape the next chapter of your life. He's about 11, possibly named Nikos, possibly not. He's been dragged here on a class trip and mostly cares about snacks. But something makes him stop in front of you. He squints, tilts his head, then turns to his teacher and asks, "Why didn't they just throw it away?" The room goes quiet. The teacher starts explaining preservation practices and monastic record-keeping, but you feel the real question hanging in the air like incense. Why keep this of all the things? Why bother? And now you're more than just a receipt. You're a mystery. Scholars take up the question. Papers are written. A tiny academic subfield briefly blooms around the idea of intentional non-destruction. They begin tracing document lifespans across empires, looking for evidence that some items were deliberately preserved, not just accidentally saved. You become Exhibit A. One theory suggests the tax office kept your scroll for audit purposes. Another claims the parchment itself was unusually high quality, reused and recopied multiple times before finally being retired into a bundle of bureaucratic detritus. A more whimsical theory, surprisingly well-argued, claims that Theocritus himself hid it, afraid it might implicate him in that minor barley discrepancy. Historians still argue, but something is shifting. Suddenly, you're not a leftover. You're a survivor to a country on purpose. Eleni writes an op-ed titled, "The Quiet Lives of Documents," in which she says, we don't always know why a scroll survives. Sometimes it's because it was important, sometimes because it was ignored, and sometimes because one bored clerk didn't want to get up and burn it. It's the most read article on Byzantine Studies Quarterly that year. But the schoolboy's question doesn't just echo in academia, it ripples through digital culture too. A viral TikTok shows your case while a voiceover dramatically intones, "This receipt outlived kings." It gets 3 million views. Someone starts a trend, users post the oldest thing in their house with the caption, "Why didn't they just throw it away?" You become a meme again. This time still valid, just no one wants to admit it. It gets printed on mugs. And you are reborn once more. Not in the academic halls or on television, but in whispers on screens across oceans. You become the mascot of data hoarders, the symbol of the archivist's quiet revenge. You're on stickers, podcasts, even a slowcore indie song titled Barley Ledger Track 7 that samples the sound of quills scratching parchment over a lo-fi beat. You dear scroll are trending. And for the first time, people, not just scholars, not just students, but people, start to ask what else was written down, logged, recorded, then slowly buried under centuries of forgetting. Old store signs are photographed, receipts kept, grandmother's ledger books lovingly digitized. Someone mails a grocery list from 1972 to the Cyprus Museum marked, "Maybe this matters too." And the museum, bless them, displays it right next to you for 1 month. They call the exhibit Ephemera Eternal. You're joined by boarding passes, postcards, scrawled notes, outdated coupons, a temporary celebration of the things nobody meant to remember, but which lingered anyway. A young woman reads your translation out loud one day, not loudly, just softly like a lullaby to herself. 2 measures taxed, remainder 1/5 tithe received, barley. Then she smiles. And it isn't about the numbers. It's about time folding. You think of the hand that wrote you, the air on that day, the crackling stylus, the faint smell of pressed barley husk clinging to wool robes. That moment, meaningless, and then 1,000 years later, everything. All because someone didn't throw you away. So when a new intern drops, their clipboard startles a cat. Yes, still a museum cat, and blurts, "I don't even know what I'm doing here." You resist the urge to whisper, "Current, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to." Years dissolve as they tend to do. The lights above your display shift to LEDs, cooler, more efficient, allegedly better for aging parchment. You miss the warmth a little, the hum, the barely audible buzz of the old bulbs. But such is the price of longevity. Everything around you evolves while you remain precisely what you've always been. And then the interns start arriving again. Always in waves, each one slightly more tattooed, slightly more caffeinated, slightly more confused about how to use the photocopier. You become their unofficial rite of passage. Every new hire must survive at least 1 long day of translating your dull inventory into modern Greek English, or sometimes Swedish, depending on visitor demand. One intern even creates a tiny zine about you. It's titled With a Grain That Wouldn't Die. Onhuinen, you're flattered. Your translated text, once a dry, bureaucratic note, is now etched into jewelry quoted in dorm room posters and used in a poetry chapbook titled Receipts of Empire. You suspect the original scribes would be horrified, but it's hard to be mad when you're this unexpectedly beloved. The museum gift shop begins selling a tote bag with your likeness on it, along with the line, 115 tithe, paid in barley received. It sells out. Back in academia, there's new debate, always is. A visiting professor from Krakow argues that your date stamp might be off by 2 decades due to a misreading of the local lunar reckoning system. Another suggests the barley you record was part of a surplus pushed west after a brief crop glut in the Taurus Mountains. Historians still argue whether your contents reflect local stability or subtle panic evidence, perhaps of imperial strain leaking into rural economies like oil from a cracked amphora. You don't weigh in. But you remember the tremble in that clerk's hand. And now you hear new voices. One child, barely tall enough to reach your case, stares at you for several minutes, then declares solemnly, "This one's the boss of the museum." Another visitor, a quiet man with a white cane and a radio clipped to his collar, listens to the audio guide and nods the whole way through. When he reaches your case, he smiles to no one in particular and says, "They kept this." Huh. Yes, they did. You're old but not forgotten. You've become the kind of artifact that no longer exists simply for what it was, but for what it represents, which is harder to define. You're not a painting or a crown or a sword. You're not about spectacle. You're about survival. Specifically, the survival of the mundane. And that somehow is what keeps people coming. More visitors now request to see the receipt than the bronze statuary 2 rooms over. Docents begin to time their tours to hit your case at the golden hour when the sun hits just right and your fading ink glows faintly in its vacuum-sealed box. They make sure to include your journey, your shipwreck, your years in a drawer. Always with a smile, always with a joke, sometimes even a wink. A teen from Indonesia posts a tearful video explaining that your story helped her finally choose to study museum science instead of business. A retired librarian from Glasgow knits a blanket with your seal motif stitched in the corner. A wedding invitation features your barley tally in the background pattern. You are no longer the end of a transaction. You are the beginning of a movement. Not a loud one, not revolutionary, just persistent. A resistance of small things. There's a phrase that floats around now, receipt-worthy. It means worth preserving, worth remembering, worth writing down even if no one else understands why. You get used to seeing your story used as shorthand. We need to keep this, someone says about a local protest sign, it's receipt-worthy. Or it might not seem important now, but neither did the barley scroll. And the quiet magic of it is this: you never did anything special. You weren't sacred, you weren't royal, you weren't even particularly accurate if we're being honest. The unit conversion column was sloppy, the date line smudged, but you were kept. And because of that, you changed people. One person, then another, then another. The way a seed changes a field. The way a ledger becomes a legend. And if that seems like too much weight for one old receipt to carry, well, imagine how the grain felt. Treaties. It's a Tuesday, or it might be a Friday. The calendar isn't really your business anymore. Not since the centuries slipped by and left you surprisingly intact, just resting in this climate-controlled time capsule, breathing the filtered museum air like it's the spice winds of Byzantium. The museum is quiet today. School's out the summer, tourists haven't yet arrived, and the docents are all rotating between coffee and idle conversation. You're used to this tempo, the wax and wane of attention. You've seen centuries of it. And still the visitors trickle in. Today it's a family, mother, father, one sleepy boy who's clearly only here because the gift shop promised chocolate. They're doing the slow shuffle through the Byzantine wing, dragging their feet in that way only heat and obligation can cause. Until they pause. In front of you. The mother leans in and reads. Really reads. She takes her time, mouth moving silently with the syllables of a world long vanished. Then she leans back, looks to her husband and murmurs, "It's just a receipt." He shrugs. "Still here, though." "Exactly. Still here." You remember the cold press of the stylus, the crackle of the ink drying in haste, the smell of barley dusty, golden honest. You remember the scribe's hand shaking from hunger or fear, or just the sheer boredom of another endless tax day. You remember being folded, sealed, filed, carried, smuggled, submerged, dried, forgotten, found. You remember everything. And somehow, so do they. Later that week, a local university hosts a panel. It's titled, "The Useless Document: What We Learn from Bureaucratic Remains." A bit long, but not inaccurate, the lead speaker is a PhD candidate named Rena, who wears oversized glasses and talks with her hands like she's conducting an invisible orchestra. She opens with you. Slide 1, your image. Slide 2, the translation. Slide 3, a single phrase. Some things survive because someone decided they mattered. Rena talks about persistence, about how history isn't just kings and wars and conquests, it's storage closets, filing systems, cautious clerks with backaches and limited lamp oil. It's a receipt for barley that one man wrote another man, stored a sailor, packed a monk, missed a librarian misfiled, and a curator rescued centuries later. Historians still argue whether that sailor knew what he was carrying, whether the monk recognized the scroll's value, whether the librarian ever actually read it, but you're not here for the arguments anymore. You're here for the pauses, the silences between thoughts, the moments when someone lingers just a little too long, when they look up from your faded ink and really see that someone lived, that someone recorded, that someone paid for 2 measures of grain, and somehow that mundane detail wove itself into the bloodstream of time. You don't need to be famous, you just need to be remembered. And you are. A child writes a poem about you for a school competition. It starts, the paper is old, the numbers are small, man, But it held on through shipwreck and all. It wins third place. They hang it briefly beside your case, laminated in plastic, the corners slightly curled. You enjoy the company. Your seal is scanned into a digital archive. Your parchment is recreated in a 3D model for online scholars. One experimental historian even bakes barley bread using proportions derived from your measurements. The loaf is terrible, but it gets a short write-up in Gastronomy Today. You're content, not because you've reached the end of your journey, but because your journey has stopped needing a destination. Now you simply are, and that's more than enough. Because your survival is quiet proof that even the smallest records can outlast empires. Even the dullest day can ripple through centuries. Even a single barley tithe, duly recorded, humbly archived, can whisper through the ages. You were never meant to be sacred. You were meant to be useful. But in surviving uselessness, you became sacred anyway. And now you rest. Still but never silent. Old but always reaching. Ink on parchment but somehow alive. 1,000 years later you are still read. You are still held. You are still passed from one quiet pair of eyes to the next. And maybe, just maybe, so will we be. And now it's time to let go. Not of the story, but of the weight. Let it fall gently, like the dust that once settled on monastery shelves. Like the silt that cradled a sunken ship's hold centuries deep. The scroll is safe now. Not in a vault, not behind glass, but inside you. Folded quietly among all the other half-remembered moments you've carried from history's edge into your own life. Let your breath slow. Imagine the soft flicker of lamplight in a quiet archive. Stone walls, warm shadows, a faint smell of paper and cedar oil. Someone's writing in the distance, scratch, nothing urgent. Just the old rhythm of memory. Outside, the wind rustles olive trees. A door creaks open. A bell tolls once, and still the scroll rests patient and proud as time flows by. You don't have to remember everything. Just the feeling, the quiet dignity of survival, the strange holiness of the ordinary, and the way even a tax receipt can carry the echo of voices long gone, and the soft, steady hope that maybe, just maybe, will be remembered too. So breathe in once more, long, easy, deep, and let your eyelids fall. History will still be here when you wake. You did well tonight. Now sleep. Now end of script. Sweet dreams.